Okay, today what we're going to do is some basics on shooting better. It's just some basic tips to shoot better. Mainly that'll consist of gripping the gun, having a proper grip on your pistol, and dry firing, which is the best and easiest way to learning how to fire your pistol better. So we're going to go ahead and clear the gun. Of course, it's loaded. So we're going to crack the slide, make sure there's nothing in it. Now, the first thing we want to do is to consider our what they call purchase on the gun. What you want to do is you want to go ahead and close that up. And we're going to leave the magazine out. So what you want to do is get your grip on the firearm as far up as possible on the slide, as close to the slide as possible. So you're going to grip it like this, and your pointing finger should run parallel to the slide. And what you're going to do with your left hand is you're going to take your left hand and you're going to wrap your left hand around your fingers, around your other fingers. You're going to bring your thumb down, and your right thumb will be over. Both of your thumbs should be pointing forward. A lot of people like to keep their finger, that's what they have this indentation, it's a grooved indentation in front of the trigger, around the trigger guard. They keep their finger there. That's, user preference. Sometimes I have it up underneath. When I think about it, I have it there. What that'll do is help with the recoil of the weapon as well. Both of your thumbs want to be facing forward. You want to keep your hands away from the slide, the upper slide. And so your grip should look something like this. What you're basically doing is you're smothering the gun. You want to have a really tight grip on the gun. The tighter the better. There's no such thing as too tight as far as your grip. You want to smother the bottom of the gun. All you want to be visible really is a slide. Now, dry firing, what we're doing is we're firing the gun without any live ammunition in it. That's what dry firing is. And what you want to do is you want to not even really aim, but to look at your front sight. The sight that's at the beginning of the barrel. And you want to fire the gun and not have this sight move as you're firing the weapon. So you're going to grip it. In this instance, you're not using live ammunition, so you don't have to squeeze it tight. But you want to have a normal grip on the weapon, and you want to squeeze the trigger, squeeze the trigger, squeeze the trigger, squeeze the trigger. And when the gun actually does fire, you shouldn't know when it's going to fire. You shouldn't be trying to make the gun shoot. When you do that, you're pulling and you're pulling, and as you can see, when you pull the trigger, the front of the barrel moves. If the barrel moves at all, the bullet is not going to hit its target. So we're going to squeeze, 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 and the gun fires. Squeeze, squeeze, and the gun fires. Practicing this, you're getting used to the trigger. You're getting used to the firing mechanism, approximately how long and it's going to take to fire. You're going to get used to the trigger itself and how the trigger feels as you're pulling it. the stiffness of it, or some triggers are spongy and they take, I'm gonna keep my hand, and as you can see, I'm actually pulling the trigger right now. It's not firing, but I'm pulling the trigger, and there it is. In order to I call it rack, but it's actually resetting the trigger. On most weapons, if you're using a semi-auto gun that typically doesn't have a hammer, as this Springfield XD or most other semi-autos, most semi-autos away from the 1911 are not going to have a hammer. So if you're using a semi-automatic weapon that doesn't have a hammer, I'm going to fire it. And it only takes a minimal effort, maybe an inch, to reset the trigger, to pull the slide back. So and your slide is reset. You know, it doesn't take much. So you practice. You can practice with one hand. You should do this a few times a week. Even if you're an advanced user is going to do this a few times a week as well. Especially if you're getting a new pistol. Once you get a new pistol, you want to become acclimated with that pistol, and so you're gonna dry fire and get a feel for it. See how it feels in your hand. This is a good practice system for especially beginners who are somewhat uncomfortable with the big explosion, the big bang of when a pistol is going to fire. You gain control over the weapon. You're getting used to it. You're knowing what to expect. And so when you do finally get to the range and you do fire it, it's not a surprise as to what's going to happen. You know what's going to happen. You're causing it to happen. And in addition to that, you're putting your rounds on your target. The hardest thing to do, the hardest part of shooting is not aiming. It's keeping the weapon still while you're firing. A lot of times you'll hear and you'll see on television where the police are, freeze, don't move, freeze, don't move, freeze, don't move. I say, get on the ground, get on the ground. And what they're doing is they're talking, but they're pulling the trigger. While they're talking, get on the ground. I said, get on the ground now, get on the ground, I'll kill you. And the trigger, and the gun fires, the trigger goes off. What they're doing is they're squeezing the trigger slowly. If their front sight does move a little bit, they're putting it back on target while they're pulling that trigger. For women, usually the Isosceles stance is the better stand. That's the one where you see the guy, the police officer, the pistol is straight out in front of him like this, and it's straight in front of his body, and he's bringing his head to align with the sights of the pistol, or he's bringing the pistol up to align with his sights in the head. Sometimes it's a little bit of both. My shooting style is more of a fighting stance. It's, holding the weapon as you would your fist while you're fighting. And so my left arm is at a 45 or so degree angle, and my right arm is pretty much straight out. Those are the two major stances. But this is really the only good way to grip a firearm. Some people teacup like this. And what happens when you fire a gun, the recoil it's like this. The recoil brings the gun up. Now, you have force on your left hand, so you're even adding to the recoil. What do you want to do when you fire? You don't want a lot of recoil, you want the least amount of recoil. And that's why we're gripping the gun so tightly and we're forcing it back on. What happens, you pull the trigger, it recoils. You want to get that gun back on target as soon as possible. If you're adding to the recoil, how is the gun going to get back on target? It can't. Not as quickly as it can if you weren't teacupping it. And so this is the most acceptable form. What you want to do is, after a few times that you've done this, and you can get the weapon firing without moving the front sight or the barrel of the gun where it doesn't move, what you can then do is you can go on and find something to aim at. And you look through and you look through the sights. You put your front sight on target. You look through the sights. You rack the slide, aim, and pull the trigger, making sure the front sight does not move from target. You don't want that front sight moving from the target. Pick a target, I don't know, 10, 20 feet away, and you squeeze that trigger and make sure that that front sight does not move from target. You should do this probably 15 minutes a day, maybe twice a week. When you have a new gun, or if you're a new shooter, and after you get that and you're at the range and you're hitting where you want to hit on a target, then you can, slow it down to maybe once a week. You want to stay acclimated with your pistol. You don't want to have to pick up your pistol and forget, what you've taught yourself, what you've learned. You want to stay acclimated with it. When you get a new pistol, as I said before, you should, do that again, twice a week until you're proficient with it. And then maybe once a week thereafter. I do mine when I change my guns. I'm carrying this one now every day. And so, for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been doing it a few times a week. I've been dry firing a few times a week. And, for 10 or 15 minutes, I'll sit and I'm watching a television show. When the commercial comes on, until the commercial goes, until the movie comes back on or the show comes back on, I'll just dry fire throughout the commercials, I probably don't need to do it that much because I'm, hitting whatever I want at, 75, 100 feet away, but I do it just so that I stay used to it and that I get used to the feel of it, because I carry, like I said, I have so many guns, and I've been carrying a different gun aside from this for the longest, and so each weapon is different, and you want to stay acclimated and get familiar with the one that you're using on a daily basis. And this is the one that I've been using for the last 3 weeks, and so I've been practicing with this. But that's the most important thing. It's the pull of the trigger is gonna determine how good of a shooter you are. Again, we'll try to get a better. This is how you want to grip it with your. Unless you want to use that one, your forefinger on the front of the trigger. I'm usually like this. Sometimes I'm like this. I'm usually like this. Your fingers in front of your left hand completely wrapped around the grip of the gun. Your palm is almost touching your other palm. It's resting and it's covering that space. The left hand is covering that space. Your fingers are wrapped around your right fingers. Your thumbs are facing forward and they're parallel. They're both pointing to the front of the gun. And that's a proper gripping technique. Up as high as possible, as close to the slide as possible. And that's it. You want to basically smother the bottom of the gun. You want to smother it. You don't want to see any of the bottom of the gun. You're smothering the gun. One-handed shooting is, I've tried it, I've hit, I've missed. I usually don't bother shooting one-handed. I try because, you see it on television. It's so uncomfortable and it feels so unnatural when you try it that you don't bother with it much very often. But this one right here is a Springfield. It's an XDM. It's 40 cal with a 3.8 inch barrel. It's all black, of course, as you can see. And it's a very, very good and effective pistol. It's got a match grade barrel, chrome lined barrel, with a very, very good trigger. It's got numerous safety indicators right here on the trigger. You can see it's racked and it's ready to fire, but there's that safety right there. It's got a safety on the grip, the back of the grip right here. So your palm has to be in, pressing against it. And as you can see, my palm is pressing. I'm holding it tightly, but it's still not firing. Your finger has to be completely on the trigger in order for it to fire. And if I've started firing now. It has a ready to fire indicator at the rear of the top of the slide. And if it was a round in the chamber, on the top, it has this indicator right here. I'm gonna, just for demonstration purposes. All right, that gun is ready to go. And as you can see, that nipple right there, there's a round in the chamber. The indicator that it's ready to fire right there. And it's got the two manual, I'm not going to call them manual safeties. I'm going to go ahead and, there. They're not manual, I guess they are the physical safeties. I'll call them that. Not manual safeties, but a physical safety. These two physical safeties have to be engaged in order for the weapon to fire. There are other safeties built into the weapon itself and the mechanics of the weapon so that if it drops, it won't fire, even if there's a round in the chamber. There's also this hole right here where you can look into the top of it and you can see if the magazine is in there and there's a round in the magazine. But you have the bevel up here, the safety right here, the palm safety here, and the ready to fire indicator right here. And that's the Springfield XDM in the 3.8 inch barrel. And that's it for this one. I just wanted to get this out there, this information out there to beginner shooters so that they could start off on the right foot.